Okay, welcome. Today I wanted to offer some reflections about trauma, especially childhood trauma and victimhood. And I want to talk about, a couple of the ideas here, the codependence triangle, victim, and then moving into more the co-empowerment, talking about creator, about how we move more from victimhood into being more of a creator. So enjoy. Yeah, so I was talking with someone last week and they were talking about this idea of victimhood, and especially regarding boarding school and regarding trauma work. And I just want to talk a little bit about it, and why I see this as happening and just what we can do about it. So I think when we are going through the healing process, I really see that there's 3 stages, and I've talked about this a bit. You can't really see it in the back, but we've got 3 stages. We've got denial, disconnection, dissociation. That's first stage. Second stage is awakening, and then stage 3 is integration. And it follows along a little bit the hero's journey, where the hero's journey is we have a crisis, and then we go into the darkness, down into the valley, and then we come out stage 3, which is reintegration. And I'll talk a little bit about this. But what I often find with trauma work is that sometimes we can go down into the darkness, but then we can get stuck there. And Robert Moore, the Jungian analyst, talks about this in this book, The Archetype of Initiation, saying that really when we go into the darkness, it's a place of transformation. He calls it, these are the profane space, and this is liminal space. In saying that basically when we go down there, we really need a guide. If you see any of the myths and the legends, they have a mentor. They have someone, an elder, to guide them out. And he says this is often what happens, is we can go into, the darkness, into the shadow, but then we can get stuck down there unless we have, either a group or we have a therapist, a coach, someone to guide us out into finding what the gold is. What did I learn? So I think this is really, really important. And I think it's an important stage. We've got to go down into the darkness. Often I see with people who've been through trauma, especially boarding school, is we dissociate and then we try and go straight over to stage 3. It's like gold. It's like, oh, boarding school was great for me. But we don't feel, and we've got to go through the grieving process. Otherwise we stay disassociated. We're not connected to our emotions. But the other side of that is we don't want to get stuck there. And that's what I really want to talk a little bit about today, is we get stuck in victim. That it was a terrible thing. Yes, we've got to feel it. And how long we go down into the darkness for. For me, I cried every day in my 20s for 2 years. It was a really dark space. And then I came out the other side. Rod Boothroyd, in his book, The Warrior, Magician, Lover, King, he says that, and when I spoke to him in my podcast, he says that the grief, it's like a reservoir, and gradually it drops down when we grieve, and then it's almost like we come above the surface. It's like we can return to joy, really. So if I go now into a little bit of this drama triangle. So essentially you've got victim, you've got persecutor, you've got rescuer. The opposites of them are creator, challenger, and coach. Now I don't have time to go into really the other sides of these, but I'd like to just stick on victim and creator. So often I see with when we go down into that darkness down here, we often go into the victim, which I think is important. We need to spend some time in there, and at the same time, when we're down here, we can often collapse. You know, our body, you know, when we're crying, we're grieving, we're collapsing. And really what's important for us is to keep the body open. I love, and I've mentioned this many times, the film, the Work, which is going into Folsom Prison, which was directed by one of my guests on my podcast, Gethin Aldous. And he says a couple of things when I interviewed him. One is vulnerability is your superpower. But in the film, one of the men says, one of the facilitator said, a man cries with his shoulders back and his head up. And I think sometimes when we go into grief, we go into victim, we collapse. And the guide, the mentor, the coach, the therapist will just remind you to, you know, just keep opening up. You're in a good space. You're grieving. It's great. So I think part of the victim is the poor me. You know, it was terrible. You know, and I think we've got to get to that point. We've got to spend some time there. But if we get stuck there, then, you know, we stay in victimhood. The other question I used to say to myself a lot when I was young was, why me? And there's always an answer. Why me? Well, I had, you know, boarding school, death of friends, you know, addiction. I can always find an answer to why me. Whereas I'll come to the better questions you can ask. But also another thing with the victim, he is just focused on what he doesn't want, what she doesn't want. Just focused on that. We're kind of just focused on the negative. Yeah. So how we move from victim to creator. So the creator just asks questions. It realizes, you know, I love the word sovereign. So the creator is another word for sovereign. So king, queen within ourselves. And we ask the question, what do I want? What do I want here? So we've got a negative situation. What do I want? Oh, this is the solution I'd like to move towards. And then the second question is, what can I do about it? So I will give you an example. Last year I bought a new car, and when I got back from the seller, I realized I had a flat tire, and I'm like, and I was annoyed by that. I immediately asked the question, what do I want? I was like, well, I want that fixing. What can I do about it? Call the garage. So I called the garage, got it fixed, you know, got it to be taken in a couple of days later. So I stopped worrying about it. In the past, when I was in victim, I'd go, oh, God, the tyres, you know, that's really annoying. I've just wasted this money getting this car, and I could get lost in that cycle. So I think, you know, that's kind of really it with this. So it's important for us to realize, yes, we've got this challenge. We go into the darkness, but then we've got to come out. What's the gold? So for your trauma, what have you learned? You know, so for me, I often say this to my clients, especially boarding school. If you can get through boarding school, or if you can get through your childhood trauma, you can get through anything. You've got this strength inside of you. You know, you can spend 10 years in an institution without your parents. You can survive anything. And so that's one of the goals. So for me, another of my gold from boarding school has been my discipline. You know, I got that from there because we were very, very disciplined. Some I know that's not their gold, but for me, that's a definite aspect of my gold, is that I have this incredible discipline. The third thing for me is, you know, I now feel really on purpose because of what happened to me at boarding school, what happened to me as a child, is now I'm determined to, do whatever I can to speak up about this, to do this. So I feel that's another bit of gold. So it's kind of finding out for you, what's your gold? You know, and Robert Bly in his book, Iron John, he says, often it's where our wound is where our gift will be that we give to society. Yeah. And there is also a Sufi saying which says, where the scar is, where the wound is, that is where the light will enter. You know, that is where you can give back to society. So, yeah. So just some ideas. If you get stuck in the victim, that's okay. You know, we grieve, but then to move into creator. And how I like to see it with self-development work is it is like an infinity loop. Yeah, this is kind of the darkness. We go into, looking into our trauma, and then this side is the light. If we just focus on the light, then we miss both sides. We've got to keep flowing, going into our stuff, maybe your therapy, talk about what happened, and then you come into the joy. What's my gold? What's my joy? What's my appreciation? What can I be grateful for? But if we get lost here, it's almost like we're dissociated. We've got to flow, feel all the light and the dark. So yeah, I think those are just some reflections there. So if you notice you've gone into victim, that's fine. We need to. I spent many years there, and it was my wife really finally who said to me, well, what's the gold from your boarding school experience? I'm like, yeah. And when we're really focused on what I want, what do I want to see here? It gives us that sovereignty rather than just thinking of what I don't want. No, what do I want? And what can I do about it? It might be smiling. It might be laughing. It might be connecting to someone. Maybe it's tears. It's like, what do I want and what can I do about it? So bless you for all your amazing work. So I've got a great podcast going live on Friday talking about third culture kids. It's about people who grew up in another country and then were sent to schooling in another, the UK or America, something like that. Could be the term military brats is the lady, Nikki Moxie, who I was interviewing. And then I spoke to a man called Patrick Mills, who was the founder of 2000 AD, and Judge Dredd, speaking on the podcast yesterday about the Catholic Church and his upbringing, which is very powerful. And then, next week I've got another interview with a great guest, and then next Saturday I'm going to be going up to Gabor Mate's conference, where we're also going to interview a few people for our film. So exciting. So thank you. I hope this is useful, and any questions, let me know.